It all started with a smell. Or, more accurately, the accusation of a smell. Before the worms, before the cops, before the little van with the ridiculously proud logo, there was just me, my backyard, and a glorified plastic barrel I called the Alchemist. Most people have hobbies that are, respectable. They build ships in bottles or learn Italian or get really, really into sourdough. My hobby was rot. Controlled, beautiful, magnificent rot. I was a compost man. I took the ghosts of last night's dinner, the coffee grounds, the wilted lettuce, the banana peels that had lingered one day too long, and I gave them a second chance at life. I'd tumble the Alchemist, my sturdy black compost tumbler, and listen to the gentle, sloshing sound of decomposition. To me, it was the sound of creation. The end result was this rich, dark, crumbly stuff that smelled like a forest floor after a spring rain. It was magic. My dirt baby, as my wife Maya called it. My life was a comfortable suburban cliché. I worked from home as a graphic designer, which meant my daily commute was a 12-step journey from the bed to the desk. Maya was a kindergarten teacher, a job that supplied her with endless patience and a permanent aura of glitter. Our little corner of the cul-de-sac was our sanctuary. My kingdom was the backyard, a slightly too wild patch of green that I was slowly transforming into a pollinator paradise. Her kingdom was the inside of the house, which she kept from descending into the typical chaos of a creative professional who occasionally forgets what a vacuum cleaner is for. This particular Tuesday had been perfect. I'd finished a big project for a client, the sun was shining, and a fresh batch of compost was ready. It was dark, loamy, and teeming with microbial life. I was forking it into my struggling tomato beds, humming off-key, when the first tremor in the force was felt. Excuse me. The voice sliced through the peaceful afternoon air like a diamond-tipped drill. I froze, pitchfork in hand. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The tone alone, a unique blend of entitlement and condescension, was a registered trademark. It was Carol Peterson, my next-door neighbor and the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood mediocrity. I slowly turned, composing my face into something resembling pleasant neutrality. Oh good, my inner monologue sighed. The fun police have arrived. Hey, Carol, lovely day, I said, leaning on my pitchfork. She was standing at the precise edge of her property line, as if crossing onto my lawn would expose her to some rare tropical disease. Her own lawn, a perfect, chemically treated carpet of unnerving green, looked like it was judging my slightly too long fescue. She was dressed in crisp white capris and a beige polo shirt, her blonde bob helmet-like and immobile against the gentle breeze. She didn't return the pleasantry. Her eyes were narrowed, fixed on the Alchemist. I need to talk to you about that. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the tumbler, as if it were a dead possum I'd propped up for decoration. The Alchemist? I asked, patting its warm plastic side. Just giving the tomatoes a little boost. I don't care what you call it, she snapped. It's disgusting. The stench is becoming unbearable. I blinked. Stench? My compost smelled like earth. Her yard, on the other hand, perpetually smelled of the lilac breeze chemical fertilizer her lawn service sprayed every other Friday. I was pretty sure if you lit a match over her grass, the whole neighborhood would go up in a mushroom cloud. It's just compost, Carol, I said, trying for a calm, educational tone. It's sealed. There's no smell unless you're standing right over it, and even then it's just earthy. Don't you condescend to me, Leo, she said, her voice rising. I have guests over for bridge on Thursdays, and for the last month, we've had to keep the windows closed because of the odor wafting from your property. It's attracting vermin. I saw a squirrel near your fence yesterday. A squirrel! I had to physically restrain myself from pointing out that squirrels, in fact, live in suburbs, They are not exotic cryptids summoned by the dark magic of decomposing vegetable matter. I'm pretty sure the squirrels are here for the oak trees, I offered weakly. It's bringing down the property values of the entire cul-de-sac, she plowed on, hitting the Karen trifecta. Stench, vermin, property values. This is a clear violation of the HOA's aesthetic standards. Section 8, subsection B. All yard equipment must be stored out of sight and must not constitute a nuisance. That thing, she jabbed her finger again, is a nuisance. I felt a hot flush of anger. My dirt baby, a nuisance? I spent hours curating the perfect carbon-to-nitrogen ratio in that barrel. I treated it with more care than most people treat their cars. It's a compost bin, Carol. Lots of people have them. It's good for the environment. Well, it's not good for this environment, she declared. I'm going to have to file a formal complaint with the Homeowners Association. You have until the end of the week to get rid of it. And with that, she turned on her sensible heeled shoe and marched back across her chemical wasteland, leaving me standing in a cloud of righteous indignation. I went inside, slamming the sliding glass door a little harder than necessary. Maya looked up from the book she was reading. Let me guess. The Queen of Beige paid you a visit? She called the alchemist disgusting, I grumbled, collapsing onto the sofa. She said it smells. She blamed it for squirrels existing. She wants it gone. Maya made a sympathetic face. Well, that's ridiculous. Can't you just move it behind the garage so she can't see it? And that was the logical adult thing to do. It was the path of least resistance. But as I sat there, stewing in my own frustration, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just going to hide my compost bin. I wasn't going to get rid of it. I was going to do the opposite. I was going to lean in. I was going to escalate. The petty part of my brain, a part that had been largely dormant since college, suddenly woke up and demanded coffee. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Aesthetic standards? Nuisance? The words echoed in my head. I got up, crept downstairs, and opened my laptop. I started angrily Googling things like HOA compost laws and spite gardening. I scrolled through forums where people shared stories of their own neighborhood tyrants. And then, down a rabbit hole of organic gardening blogs, I saw it. It was an article titled, Vermicomposting. Turn your garbage into gardener's gold. I clicked. My eyes widened. It was like composting, but on steroids. Instead of just letting microbes do the work, you employed a subterranean army. Worms. Thousands of them. They didn't just decompose the scraps. They refined them. They ate garbage and excreted pure, unadulterated botanical crack. The article called the end product worm castings, or more poetically, black gold. It was the most nutrient-rich, all-natural fertilizer known to man. And the best part? It was completely odorless. In fact, most systems were designed to be kept indoors, in a garage, a basement, a shed, out of sight, compliant with Section 8, subsection B. A slow maniacal grin spread across my face. Oh, this was so much better than just moving the tumbler. This wasn't hiding. This was upgrading. This was innovation born of pure, unadulterated spite. Carol Peterson didn't like my compost? Fine. I was going to launch a full-scale worm farming operation in my backyard. I wasn't just going to make fertilizer for myself. I was going to make so much of it that I could sell it. I'd call it something grand, something that mocked her sterile, lifeless yard. Organic gold? I whispered to the empty living room. Karen called my composting disgusting. So I was about to start a worm farm and sell organic gold fertilizer. The war had begun, and I was bringing worms. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since I'd successfully kept a fiddle-leaf fig alive for a full year. The petty resentment from yesterday had fermented overnight into a giddy, entrepreneurial zeal. I was no longer just Leo Maxwell, graphic designer. I was Leo Maxwell, future vermiculture magnate. My first order of business was to dive headfirst into the bizarre and fascinating online world of worm acquisition. It turns out you can buy pretty much anything on the internet, including live, wriggling invertebrates by the pound. I spent 3 hours that morning, coffee in hand, comparing worm vendors with the same intensity I usually reserved for choosing a new font for a corporate logo. There were sites like Worm World and The Squirm Firm, each with slick marketing and glowing testimonials. "Our worms are happier," one site proclaimed. How do you measure worm happiness? Do they wriggle with more gusto? Do they form little conga lines in the dirt? The product descriptions were a marvel of salesmanship. Introducing the red wiggler, Eisenia fetida, the undisputed champion of the composting world. A voracious eater with a can-do attitude, this worm will turn your apple cores and coffee grounds into horticultural gold faster than you can say nutrient-rich humus. I felt like I was shopping for a high-performance sports car, not a box of decomposers. Did I want the red wigglers, the workhorses of the industry? Or should I spring for the more exotic European night crawlers, which were apparently better for soil aeration and could double as fishing bait? From the compost bin to the tackle box, the European nightcrawler does it all. I pictured myself trying to explain that to Carol. No, it's a multi-platform business, Carol. We're disrupting both the fertilizer and live bait industries. Finally, I settled on a Compost King 5000 starter kit. It came with a multi-tiered stackable worm bin that looked like a cheap condominium for insects, a block of coconut coir for bedding, and, the main event, 2,000 red wigglers. 2,000. I clicked Confirm Purchase and felt a jolt of adrenaline. There was no going back now. I had officially invested in my spite. Maya came home that evening to find me clearing out a space in the garage. "What's all this?" she asked, sidestepping a pile of old paint cans. "Making room for the new employees," I said with a straight face. She raised an eyebrow. "Employees?" "They arrive Friday," I said gravely. 2,000 of them, all highly motivated and ready to work. Their compensation package is basically unlimited garbage, so I think they'll be happy here. Maya stared at me, then slowly broke into a grin. "You actually did it, didn't you? You bought the worms." "It's a strategic business decision," I said, puffing out my chest. "We're diversifying our assets, moving into the burgeoning field of organic waste management." "You're so weird," she said, shaking her head as she walked into the house. "I love it." Friday couldn't come soon enough. At around noon, the mail truck pulled up. Our regular mailman, a cheerful guy named Dave, walked up the driveway holding a large, flat, ventilated cardboard box at arm's length, a deeply confused expression on his face. "Hey, Leo," he said, his eyes darting from me to the box. "Got a package for you. It's, humming." "That'll be the workforce," I said, taking the box from him. It was surprisingly heavy, and it was indeed vibrating with a strange collective energy. I could feel the faint, squirming motion of thousands of tiny bodies. "Right," Dave said, backing away slowly. "You have a good one, then." I took the box into the garage like a proud father bringing home a newborn. Maya came out to witness the unboxing. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, my voice full of theatrical tension. "I'm not sure anyone can ever be ready for this," she replied, peering at the box. I cut the tape and lifted the flaps. Inside was a large, breathable bag filled with dark, moist peat moss, and woven through it, a writhing, wriggling, reddish-pink mass of life. It was a lot of worms, a whole lot of worms. They were thinner than earthworms, more vibrant, and they were everywhere. "Behold," I announced, gesturing grandly, 2,000 of the hardest-working invertebrates in the business, the founders of Maxwell's Organic Gold Fertilizers. Maya leaned in, her nose wrinkled. You bought a box of worms. You spent actual money on a box of dirt and worms. It's not just a box of worms, I corrected her. It's a highly efficient, self-replicating bioreactor, and our first act of corporate espionage against the beige tyranny of Carol Peterson. Setting up their new high-rise apartment was a messy, comical affair. I soaked the coconut coir brick in a bucket until it expanded into a fluffy, damp bedding. I layered it with shredded newspaper. Then came the delicate part, introducing the employees to their new office. I gently tipped the bag of worms into the bin. They immediately began to burrow down, away from the light. It was mesmerizing. The first week was a steep learning curve. The worm Bible I'd been reading online made it sound so simple. Add food scraps, keep it moist, done. The reality was a bit more nuanced. My first mistake was over-enthusiasm. I gave them an entire week's worth of kitchen scraps at once, a veritable smorgasbord of melon rinds, apple cores, and soggy lettuce. This, I learned, was the worm equivalent of setting off a stink bomb in a crowded elevator. The bin started to smell sour and anaerobic. The worms, instead of feasting, began staging a mass exodus, climbing the walls of the bin in a desperate attempt to escape my well-intentioned but suffocating generosity. I spent an entire evening in a frantic damage control operation, armed with a tiny spade and a spray bottle, whispering apologies to my squirming workforce. I carefully removed the rotting food, aerated their bedding, and promised them I'd be a better boss. It was a humbling experience. I was a micromanager, and my employees were voting with their non-existent feet. By the end of the week, I had found a rhythm. Small, regular feedings, a careful balance of greens, nitrogen-rich scraps, and browns, carbon-rich paper. The sour smell was replaced by the familiar, pleasant scent of damp earth. The worms were happy. They were eating, they were pooping, and they were turning my garbage into gold. The factory was officially open for business. The initial success of the Compost King 5000 was intoxicating. Every few days, I'd peek into the bin, lifting the lid like a proud parent checking on a sleeping baby. My army of red wigglers was voracious. They were chewing through my kitchen scraps at an alarming rate. Within a month, I was ready to harvest the first tray of finished castings. It was black, crumbly, and looked even richer than the stuff from my old tumbler. I spread it around the base of my beleaguered rose bushes, feeling like a genius. But my ambition, fueled by spite and the surprising joy of worm husbandry, quickly outgrew the humble plastic condo in my garage. The 2,000 worms had, as promised by the website, begun to expand their workforce. I was looking at a population boom. If I wanted to produce enough organic gold to actually bag and sell, I needed to scale up. My garage was already crowded with my design equipment, Maya's car, and a decade's worth of stuff we swore we'd use again someday. I needed a dedicated facility, a headquarters. I needed to build a worm palace. I spent a weekend sketching out plans. It wouldn't be just a shed. It would be an insulated, climate-controlled, perfectly ventilated haven for my wriggling employees, a place where they could work their magic year-round, safe from the brutal summer heat and winter chills. I drew up a plan for a 10 by 12-foot structure, complete with a workbench, shelving for multiple large-scale worm bins, and its own electrical circuit. This, of course, was far beyond my own DIY capabilities. My last attempt at building something had been an IKEA bookshelf that ended up leaning so precariously it looked like a modern art installation. I needed a professional. I needed a contractor. After a few calls, I found Gus. His website was simple, his reviews were solid, and his slogan was, "Gus gets it done." He sounded like my kind of guy. He arrived the next day in a dusty Ford F-150, a burly, no-nonsense man in his 50s, with a thick gray mustache and a permanent look of weary skepticism. He walked into my backyard with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had seen every suburban homeowner's ridiculous dream and was prepared for the worst. "All right," he said, skipping the pleasantries and pulling out a notepad. "You want a shed? Standard 10 by 12? Tool storage?" "Yes, a 10 by 12, I said, trying to sound official. "But it needs to be more than just a standard shed. I need it fully insulated. Vapor barrier. A dedicated 20-amp circuit for a heating mat and a small ventilation fan. Also, I'd like a window, but one that's north-facing to avoid direct sunlight." Gus stopped writing and slowly looked up at me. His eyes, small and sharp, scanned my face as if searching for the punchline. "What for?" he asked, his voice a low grumble. "You starting a podcast out here?" "It's for an agricultural project," I said, the words suddenly feeling flimsy and absurd. Gus's mustache twitched. "Right, growing tomatoes? Little hydroponic setup?" He seemed to be offering me a plausible, respectable lie I could grab onto. I took a deep breath. Worms. The silence that followed was profound. A bird chirped in the distance. A car drove by. Gus just stared at me. He wasn't blinking. I think he might have been running a full diagnostic on my sanity. Finally, after what felt like a full minute, he let out a long, slow sigh. The sigh of a man who has accepted that the universe is a fundamentally strange and unpredictable place. "Worms," he repeated, not as a question, but as a flat statement of fact. He wrote it down on his notepad. "Okay, worms." He looked back up at me. "You gonna need special drainage for that?" "Shouldn't," I said, relieved he hadn't just gotten back in his truck and driven away. "The bins are self-contained. It's a pretty clean process." "Right," he grunted. "The things I do for a living." He scribbled a few more notes. "Fine. The Worm Palace it is. Just make sure you got the permits from the HOA and the city. Last thing I need is your neighbor with the helmet hair shutting down my job site." He knew Carol. Of course, he knew Carol. She was probably a legend in the local contractor community. Getting the permits was, as expected, a journey into the heart of bureaucratic darkness. The city was easy enough. A simple permit for an accessory dwelling under a certain square footage. The HOA, however, was another matter entirely. It required submitting a detailed proposal, including paint swatches, material lists, and a site plan, to the Architectural Review Committee, of which Carol Peterson was, naturally, the chairperson. I decided to meet this challenge with a strategy I called malicious compliance. I didn't just fill out the forms. I created a 20-page professionally designed proposal booklet, complete with 3D renderings of the shed, a detailed environmental impact statement. Spoiler, it was overwhelmingly positive. And a list of approved paint colors. I chose a color called Gentle Fawn, which was exactly one shade away from the beige of her house. I submitted it in triplicate, spiral-bound. Construction began 2 weeks later. Gus and his two-man crew were efficient and professional. The sound of saws and nail guns, however, was like a bat signal for Carol. On the first day, she was at the fence line, arms crossed, demanding to see Gus's permits. He just wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a gloved hand, pointed a thumb at my house, and said, "Talk to the worm guy. I just build the boxes." She tried to lodge a complaint about the noise. I cheerfully pointed out the HOA bylaw that permitted construction between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. She tried to complain about the debris. I showed her the perfectly tidy job site Gus maintained. She was running out of ammunition, and it was making her furious. The Worm Palace was completed in a week. It was beautiful. It was a sturdy, handsome structure that smelled of fresh-cut pine and possibility. Gus did a final walkthrough with me. his expression unchanged. "Well," he said, clapping a hand on the doorframe, "it's a damn fine worm hut. You need anything else? Give me a call. Unless it's weirder than this. This is my weirdness limit for the year." I thanked him profusely and paid him. As he was leaving, he paused. "You know," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, "my wife's a big gardener. She'd probably buy some of that worm stuff. Let me know when you're open for business." It was a small moment, but it felt like a huge victory. He got it. He might think I was a lunatic, but he respected the hustle. I spent the next weekend setting up the interior. I installed large, custom-built, continuous flow-through bins that would make harvesting much easier. I set up the ventilation, the heating mats, the workbench. As I hauled in the last bag of peat moss, I saw Carol watching me from her kitchen window, her face a mask of suspicion. She had no idea what was going on in there, and it was clearly eating her alive. The palace was operational. The empire was ready to expand. For the next few weeks, a new routine settled in. Each evening after work, I'd retreat to the Worm Palace. It became my sanctuary. The gentle hum of the ventilation fan, the earthy smell of the bins, the quiet satisfaction of tending to my silent, industrious workforce. It was incredibly calming. I was producing castings at a rate I'd previously only dreamed of. The bins were churning out pounds of the black, nutrient-rich material every week. My own garden had never looked better. My tomatoes were producing fruit the size of softballs, and the rose bushes that Carol's chemical runoff had nearly killed were now covered in vibrant, fragrant blooms. Of course, this idyllic state of affairs only served to deepen Carol's suspicion. My activities must have looked bizarre from her vantage point. I was the strange neighbor who had built a windowless fortress in his backyard, and now spent his evenings hauling in bags of mysterious materials and hauling out buckets of something dark and soil-like. I would sometimes see her peering through her blinds, a phone pressed to her ear. I knew it was only a matter of time before she escalated things to the next level. The moment came on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the palace wearing my work clothes, an old t-shirt and dirt-stained jeans, transferring a fresh batch of castings into a set of large storage tubs. I had the door open for ventilation. It was a warm day, and the rich, loamy smell of the finished compost hung pleasantly in the air. To me, it smelled of health and vitality. To Carol, apparently, it smelled like a felony. I heard the crunch of tires on the street, then the distinct sound of car doors opening and closing with purpose. I poked my head out the door just in time to see a police cruiser parked at my curb. 2 officers were walking up my driveway. My first reaction was a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic. Did I forget to pay a parking ticket? Is Maya okay? Then I saw Carol, standing on her porch, arms crossed, with a look of grim triumph on her face. And I knew. Oh, I knew. A wave of gleeful anticipation washed over me. Showtime. I walked out to meet them, wiping my earthy hands on my jeans. One officer was older, with a graying mustache and a weary, seen-it-all expression. The other was younger, taller, with a curious, almost eager look in his eyes. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked, my voice the picture of innocent bewilderment. The older one, whose name tag read Miller, spoke first. His voice was a low, tired monotone. "Sir, are you Leo Maxwell?" "I am," I said. "We received a report of a strange chemical odor and suspicious activity originating from your property. Specifically," he gestured with his chin towards the shed, "that new structure back there." I put on my best confused face. "Suspicious activity? I was just doing some gardening work." I held up my soil-caked hands as evidence. The report mentioned large bags of unknown substances, buckets of material being moved around, and a persistent, unusual smell," Miller continued, his eyes scanning the shed with professional boredom. The younger officer, Davis, was craning his neck, trying to get a look inside. This was my moment. This was the scene I had been unconsciously rehearsing for weeks. "Oh, the shed!" I said, my face breaking into a wide, enthusiastic smile. "Yes, you have to see it. It's my new business venture. Come on, I'll give you the grand tour." I turned and walked toward the Worm Palace with the confident air of a tech CEO unveiling a new product. The officers exchanged a look. Miller's was one of pure exhaustion. Davis's was one of intrigue, and followed me. I pushed the door open wide, revealing the neat, organized interior. The rows of professional-looking bins, the clean workbench, the bags of peat moss and amendments stacked neatly against the wall. "Welcome," I announced grandly, "to the headquarters of Maxwell's Organic Gold Fertilizers." Miller and Davis stepped inside, their eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. They looked around, their expressions shifting from suspicion to utter confusion. "What is all this?" Officer Davis asked, pointing at one of the large bins. "This," I said, walking over and patting the bin, "is a continuous flow-through vermicomposting system. It houses approximately 50,000 Eisenia fetida, or red wiggler worms. They are the hardest-working employees a man could ask for." Officer Miller stared at me as if I had just started speaking in tongues. "You're farming worms." The technical term is vermiculture, and they're not just worms, they're ecological engineers. I launched into my full, passionate salesman pitch. I explained the entire process: how the worms consume organic waste, how their digestive tracts enrich it with enzymes and microbes, and how their castings are one of the most potent natural fertilizers in the world. I opened the lid of a finished bin to show them the beautiful, dark compost and the layer of worms just beneath the surface. To my surprise, Officer Davis was completely captivated. He leaned in, peering at the wriggling mass. "No kidding. So the worms eat the garbage, and their, waste is the fertilizer? That's actually pretty cool." "It's incredible," I said, feeding off his energy. "It's a perfect closed-loop system. Reduces landfill waste, creates a superior soil amendment, and it's completely organic. The smell you're noticing? That's humus. It's the smell of healthy soil." I grabbed a small handful of the finished castings and held it out. "Smell for yourself. No chemicals. Just earth." Davis leaned in and sniffed. "Huh. Smells like the woods." Throughout this entire exchange, Officer Miller had remained silent, his face a stone mask. He had seen drug labs, domestic disputes, and armed robberies. And now, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, he was standing in a shed while a guy in a dirty t-shirt gave his rookie partner a lecture on the digestive habits of worms. He finally turned to me, his voice gravelly with suppressed disbelief. "So, let me get this straight. The 911 call we got for a possible meth lab was because you're making dirt. Premium, organic, microbially active dirt," I corrected gently. "But yes, that's the long and short of it." Officer Miller pinched the bridge of his nose and let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire 25-year career. He looked at Davis, who was now asking me about the worm's reproductive cycle, and then back at me. He looked at the bins. He looked out the door towards Carol's house. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "All right," he said, turning to leave. "We're done here. Have a nice day, Mr. Maxwell. Try to keep the dirt-making to a dull roar." As they walked back down the driveway, I could hear Officer Davis peppering his partner with excited questions. "So could you do that with, like, a smaller bin, like on a balcony?" I watched them get in their car and drive over to Carol's house. I couldn't hear what was said, but the conversation was brief and involved Officer Miller making a few sharp, definitive gestures. Carol's triumphant expression had melted into one of slack-jawed horror. She had played her trump card, and it had been revealed to be a useless joker. She had called the cops on a gardener. I leaned against the doorframe of my worm palace, a wide, triumphant grin spreading across my face. I had been investigated by the law and declared not only innocent, but, in the eyes of one officer at least, pretty cool. The war wasn't over, but I had just won a major, glorious battle. The police incident was a turning point. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was a public one. The story, as juicy stories do in quiet suburbs, spread like wildfire. Within days, I was no longer just Leo, the guy who worked from home. I was the worm guy, the eccentric horticulturalist who had been mistaken for a drug lord by the neighborhood's resident busybody. My reputation had a certain mystique now. I was a rebel, a dirt rebel. This newfound notoriety, combined with my rapidly growing stockpile of worm castings, meant it was time to get serious. It was time to turn organic gold from a petty fantasy into a legitimate business. My first step was branding. As a graphic designer, this was my home turf. I spent an entire weekend sketching logos and brainstorming taglines with Maya. We riffed on some truly terrible ideas first. Maxwell's Miracle Mud. The worms turn fertilizer. Dirt cheap, but good. We need something that's classy, but also hints at the backstory, Maya said, sipping her tea as she looked over my sketches. How about organic gold? So good, it's criminal, I suggested. Maya laughed. Too on the nose. We don't want to actively antagonize the police department. Finally, we landed on the perfect identity. The logo was a simple, elegant drawing of a worm curling into a circle, looking almost like a Celtic knot, with a single green sprout emerging from the center. The name was clean and confident. Maxwell's Organic Gold. And below it, the tagline that Maya came up with, a stroke of pure genius. The secret's in the soil. It was perfect. Understated, professional, and it didn't explicitly mention my feud with Carol. But we knew. Oh, we knew. The next weekend was designated as Packaging Palooza. I ordered 100 brown craft paper bags with resealable tops and a custom-made rubber stamp of our new logo. We set up an assembly line in the garage. I would weigh out the castings into 1 pound and 5 pound bags, and Maya, with the precision of a kindergarten teacher managing a craft project, would stamp the logo perfectly in the center of each one. The garage filled with the rhythmic thump-thump of the stamp and the rich, earthy scent of the product. By Sunday evening, we had 100 bags of Maxwell's Organic Gold, stacked and ready for market. They looked real. They looked like something you'd actually buy in a store. My sales strategy was to start small, the local farmers market. It was held every Saturday morning in the town square, a bustling hub of organic vegetable sellers, artisan cheesemakers, and crafty potters. I was nervous as I paid the fee for a small stall, wondering if anyone would actually buy a bag of worm poop from a guy they'd never seen before. My first day was a revelation. I set up a simple table with a burlap cloth, my neatly stacked bags of organic gold, and a small sign I'd designed that explained the benefits of worm castings. For visual flair, I brought 2 of my own tomato plants from home, one grown in regular potting soil, looking merely okay, and one grown with a healthy dose of my product, looking like a triffid, groaning under the weight of huge red fruit. The side-by-side comparison was a powerful sales tool. The customers were a fascinating cross-section of humanity. First came the master gardeners, the hardcore horticulturalists. They'd walk up, pick up a bag, and ask pointed questions. "What's your feedstock?" One older woman in a wide-brimmed hat asked, peering at me over her glasses. Primarily vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, and shredded cardboard for carbon, I answered, feeling like I was defending a doctoral thesis. The worms are red wigglers. The castings are screened through a 1/4-inch mesh. She nodded, impressed. Good, good. I'll take 2 5-pound bags. My dahlias are looking a bit anemic this year. Then came the hipsters, drawn in by the craft paper packaging and the authentic small batch vibe. Dude, is this you? A guy with a magnificent beard asked, pointing at my logo. Like, you make this in your backyard? Yep, I said. It all started when my neighbor complained about my compost pile. His eyes lit up. No way. So this is like spite fertilizer? That's so authentic. The narrative is amazing. I'll take one. I don't even have a garden, but I've got a succulent that could use the good vibes. My favorite interactions were with the curious beginners, people who just wanted their houseplants to not die. I'd explain with genuine passion how just a little sprinkle of organic gold could bring their sad-looking ferns back from the brink. My enthusiasm was infectious. By noon, I had sold every single bag. I was left with an empty table, a cash box full of money, and a profound sense of shock. People wanted my dirt. They really, really wanted it. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. My farmer's market stall became a weekly fixture. People started coming back, showing me pictures of their gardens on their phones. Look at these zucchini. My petunias have never been this big. I was a local hero, the worm king of Northwood County. The ultimate proof of my success came a month later. I got a call from the owner of The Potted Plant, the biggest garden center in town. She said customers had been coming in and asking for my product by name. She wanted to place a wholesale order, a big one. That was the moment it tipped from a hobby to a real business. I had to register as an LLC. I had to figure out invoicing and wholesale pricing. I had to seriously ramp up production, which meant more bins, more worms, and more work. And I needed a delivery vehicle. I found it on Craigslist. A slightly beat-up but reliable white Ford Transit Connect van. It was perfect. I spent a weekend carefully applying a huge vinyl decal of my logo to both sides. The next Monday, I parked it in my driveway. Not on the street. In my driveway, perfectly centered, where the morning sun would glint off the proud, circular worm logo. It was a mobile billboard, aimed squarely at Carol Peterson's living room window. Every time she looked outside, she would be greeted by a 10-foot-wide tribute to the very hobby she had tried to extinguish. The little local paper even did a small feature on me in their business section, a quirky human interest story titled, "Local Designer Finds Gold in His Garden." They took a picture of me, smiling like an idiot, holding a handful of my product in front of the Worm Palace. I framed the article and hung it in the shed. I was no longer just a guy getting revenge. I was an accidental entrepreneur, the proud proprietor of a thriving worm-powered empire. And every morning, when I saw Carol pointedly pulling her curtains shut, the victory tasted as sweet and rich as the soil I was selling. The success of organic gold was a constant, simmering source of irritation for Carol Peterson. My weekly sellouts at the farmer's market, the van parked in my driveway like a monument to her failure, the friendly waves I'd get from neighbors who were now my loyal customers. It was all salt in her self-inflicted wound. She couldn't complain about the business itself. I was fully permitted and ridiculously quiet. The Worm Palace was a silent, odorless factory. She needed a new battlefield, a place where she could reassert her dominance. She found it in the HOA's annual Pride of the Cul-de-Sac garden and lawn competition. The announcement arrived in everyone's mailbox via a crisp, cream-colored flyer. It was an institution as old as the neighborhood itself. The grand prize was a gaudy golden garden gnome, a gift certificate to a home improvement store, and most importantly, a full year of undisputed bragging rights. Carol had won for the last 5 years straight. It was her Super Bowl, her Olympics. Her lawn and meticulously manicured flower beds were the stuff of local legend. She didn't participate in the contest. She reigned over it. This was her turf, both literally and figuratively. Normally, I wouldn't have even considered entering. Competing with Carol on gardening felt like challenging a shark to a swimming contest, but this year was different. "You should do it," Maya said one evening, tapping the flyer on the counter. "What? Are you crazy?" I said. "That's her sacred ground. She'd probably sabotage my petunias in the dead of night." "No," Maya said, her eyes twinkling with competitive fire. "This is the final boss battle. Your garden has never looked better. This is the ultimate test of organic gold. It's the perfect end to the story. The plucky upstart with his worm-powered paradise versus the evil queen and her chemical kingdom." She had a point. It was too poetic to resist. It was the ultimate showdown. Nature versus chemicals. Organic chaos versus sterile order. My philosophy versus hers. The gauntlet had been thrown. I filled out the entry form that night. The next 2 weeks, the cul-de-sac became a silent battleground of horticultural warfare. My approach was simple. I just kept doing what I was doing. I lovingly worked another batch of fresh castings into my flower beds and vegetable patches. I let the bees buzz, I let the ladybugs roam, and I let my plants grow with the wild, untamed vigor that came from healthy soil. My garden was a riot of color and life, a beautiful, buzzing, slightly chaotic ecosystem. Coneflowers and black-eyed Susans stood shoulder to shoulder with towering tomato plants and sprawling zucchini vines. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Carol's approach, on the other hand, was one of overwhelming force. Her lawn service came twice a week instead of their usual bi-weekly schedule. I saw her outside at all hours, armed with a ruler to measure the height of her grass, a level to ensure the perfect flatness of her hedges, and various spray bottles filled with mysterious, brightly colored liquids. Her garden was a masterpiece of control. Her rose bushes were pruned into rigid, unnatural shapes. Her flower beds were arranged in strict, color-coded blocks of impatiens and begonias, with not a single weed or errant petal in sight. Her lawn was an immaculate, unnerving green carpet, so flawless it looked like astroturf. It was impressive in the way a military parade is impressive. Precise, orderly, and utterly devoid of joy. The day of the judging arrived. It was a sunny Saturday morning. The judging committee consisted of 3 people. Carol, of course, as the committee chair, and 2 of her HOA cronies, a meek woman named Barb and a grumpy-looking man named Frank. The whole neighborhood knew the outcome was a foregone conclusion, but it was tradition. They started at the far end of the street and slowly worked their way toward us. I stood on my porch, sipping coffee, watching their slow, judicial procession. Finally, they arrived at Carol's house. She launched into a prepared speech, pointing out the flawless uniformity of her turf and the disciplined beauty of her flower beds. Barb and Frank nodded along, dutifully impressed. Then, they crossed the invisible line in the grass and stepped into my territory. It was like moving from a museum into a rainforest. "Well," Carol said, her voice dripping with condescension, "this is vigorous." I smiled. "Thanks, Carol. That's what happens when you have healthy soil." I gave them the tour. I didn't talk about order or discipline. I talked about life. I pointed out the native bees swarming the purple coneflowers. I showed them the ladybugs eating aphids off my rose bushes. I plucked a cherry tomato from a vine and offered it to them. Barb took it and popped it in her mouth, her eyes widening in surprise at the flavor. Frank just grunted. Carol, meanwhile, was on the attack, pointing out every perceived flaw with thinly veiled insults. "Oh, look, a dandelion. How natural, she said, pointing at a single yellow flower near the walkway. Actually, dandelions are great for early-season pollinators, and their deep taproots help aerate compacted soil, I replied cheerfully. I had done my homework. And your zinnias seem to be all different heights. There's no consistency, she sniffed. They're heirloom seeds, I explained. You get more genetic diversity that way. It makes the whole plant community more resilient. For every criticism she had, I had a confident, scientific, and passionately delivered answer. I wasn't just a guy with a messy garden. I was a student of ecology. I was a worm farmer. I knew my stuff. By the end of the tour, Barb looked genuinely fascinated. Frank looked bored, and Carol looked like she'd just swallowed a wasp. The tour concluded. The judges retreated to the end of the cul-de-sac to deliberate. The whole neighborhood milled about, waiting for the inevitable announcement. This was it, the final showdown. My army of worms versus her chemical arsenal. The 10 minutes of deliberation felt like an hour. Finally, Carol, Barb, and Frank walked to the center of the cul-de-sac's central island, a patch of grass that naturally met Carol's exacting standards. She held a clipboard and a crisp white envelope. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered. Carol cleared her throat, tapping a microphone that wasn't there. Thank you all for participating in this year's Pride of the Cul-de-Sac competition, she began, her voice radiating smug authority. It is so important that we all do our part to maintain the, aesthetic integrity and property values of our wonderful community. Every year, the committee looks for a garden that best exemplifies order, discipline, and visual harmony. She was practically describing her own yard. She paused for dramatic effect, a self-satisfied smile playing on her lips as she opened the envelope. Then she froze. The smile vanished. Her eyes scanned the paper inside, then scanned it again. Her face, a carefully maintained mask of suburban placidity, began to crumble. A flicker of disbelief, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. Her jaw tightened. She looked up at the crowd, her expression lost. Barb, sensing the awkward silence, gently took the paper from Carol's limp hand. She cleared her throat. The winner of this year's competition, Barb announced, her voice surprisingly clear, is Leo Maxwell. A collective, quiet gasp went through the crowd. My own jaw dropped. Maya squeezed my arm hard. Barb continued reading from the judge's notes that she and Frank had apparently insisted on including. The committee was exceptionally impressed by the health and vitality of Mr. Maxwell's garden. We award him the prize for creating a vibrant, sustainable, and truly living garden that exemplifies modern ecological beauty and demonstrates a profound commitment to environmental stewardship. A smattering of applause started, then grew into a genuine, enthusiastic ovation. People were smiling, clapping. They were clapping for me, for the worms, for the underdog. Carol looked like she had been slapped. She forced a smile so tight it looked painful and handed me the golden gnome as if it were radioactive. I accepted it with a gracious nod. Thank you, Carol. I'll be sure to give it a place of honor. The power dynamic of the cul-de-sac had just shifted, and everyone there had felt it. The queen had been dethroned. A few months later, life had settled into a new, wonderful normal. Organic gold was no longer just a backyard operation. I was in negotiations to lease a small commercial space to expand production. The little white van was a common sight around town, and my farmer's market stall had a permanent line. One crisp autumn evening, Maya and I were sitting on our front porch, sipping hot cider. The golden gnome stood proudly in the center of my still thriving garden, right next to the worm palace, its little painted eyes staring directly at Carol's house. It was a constant, cheerful reminder of our victory. As we sat there, A familiar silver Lexus pulled quietly up to the curb, a few houses down. The engine cut off. The driver's side door opened, and Carol Peterson got out. She looked left, then right, a parody of a spy in a cheap movie. Thinking no one was watching, she scurried over to the community mailbox kiosk. Her hand darted out and snatched something from the side pocket where residents left flyers and announcements. Even from a distance, I knew exactly what it was. It was one of my new, professionally printed flyers for Maxwell's Organic Gold, complete with a 10% off coupon for first-time buyers. She clutched the flyer to her chest, glanced around one last time, and practically ran back to her car, scurrying inside as if the paper itself might burn her. I watched her drive away, a slow, deep, profoundly satisfied smile spreading across my face. I raised my mug of cider. "To the worms," I said. Maya clinked her mug against mine, her eyes sparkling in the twilight. "To the worms,"